So we've met the if statement and its possibilities with the then and the else and the end if. Now if we take the if file, you'll see in here there's a sample hello sub procedure that declares a message as a string and checks to see if the time is before 12 o'clock. If so, sets the MSG to good morning guy, checks to see if the time is after or equal to 12 o'clock, and then MSG equals good afternoon guy, and then we output the MSG inside a message box. So I run that, it says good afternoon guy. However, the afternoon in our little scenario here runs from 12 noon to 12 midnight. And when it gets to about 6 probably, we ought to be saying good evening. So I need to change my procedure slightly. I need to add a second criteria in here. Now I can add more criteria in quite happily using the and the or statement. So if I say and, so the hour time must be greater than or equal to 12, and the hour time must be less than, let's say 18 for 6 p.m. So you see these two criteria now have to work together. They both have to be true for us to fall into this section. And then I can run another little if. So if our time is greater than or equal to 18, then MSG equals good evening guy. Don't forget your end if. So then I run the hello and it's still afternoon. But if I change the system clock and then run hello, it then says good evening guy because it thinks it's about 9 o'clock at night now. So this is adding a second criteria. Now, obviously, you can follow your logic through there and add a third, a fourth, mix your ands and ors, but at that stage, you need to then start thinking about your brackets so that it's comparing the ands with the correct statements and the ors with the correct statements. But before you get to that kind of complicated stage, you will have done many ifs and done a few ands and a few ors to get yourself around that logic. Each criteria is checked. So the hour time is checked that it's greater than 12. The hour time is checked that it's under 18. If both statements are true, so they both come out as true Booleans, then we hit the then part and this message comes out. Obviously, we could have put a return and an else and put another message out. But that else would need to cover the possibility that it was before 12 and after 6 p.m. Alternatively, we can rewrite this whole statement using a nested if. So if inside an if. So let's just tidy that up a little and move down and create this as a separate sub so you can compare them. So we'll take the whole of that sub hello and call it sub hello 2. So if the time is less than 12, that's fine. That's good morning guy. Then we move and place an else. So now we know it's after 12. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that down a little and just tab in, because inside this else section, so the else section runs from else to end if, I'm going to put another if statement. So if our time is less than 18, then MSG equals good afternoon guy. Then this if has its own else, at which point the MSG becomes equals good evening guy. Don't forget the end if, and then we'll just pull the lines up there. So these bits are not then needed because we've used it a nested if. Where we ask a criteria, then that's what will happen. Else, in the else section, we then ask another question, and we only ask one. We're not asking a double here. We're not using that and. We're just saying if the time is less than 18, well, we already know that it's not less than 12. Therefore, the assumption is we must be 12 and over, and now we must be under 18. So that's the afternoon. Else, so now logically, we've asked this question and asked this question. We're now in the else situation where we must be 18 or above. Therefore, it's good evening guy. So this is a lot shorter than this syntax and will execute quicker because we're not asking 3 if statements one after the other. We're asking one if statement, and if that executes the true, we don't ask anymore. If it doesn't, then we come in and ask another one, and again, if it executes the true, then we ask no more. If it doesn't, then we use the else. So this is a much faster way of using your ifs. Rather than asking if. We ask one, and if that happens to become true, we don't ask anymore. Whereas here, we ask one, and even if that's true, we're still asking for these 2 ifs, which will slow the program down. Now, it's an imperceptible slowdown when all you're doing is putting out a message box, but on a larger application, where there are possibly hundreds or even thousands of lines of code between the opening if and the else. This is a much quicker way of making the program execute. So that's using a nested if. That's an if, whole lot there, if, then, else, end if, the whole section within, in this case, an else and an end if, but that whole bit could be between the if and the else. And I tend to tab in here so I can see where my opening if matches my closing end if. It just makes the program a little easier to read. And this is classed as nested ifs.